Mr. Kwan, thank you very much for agreeing to be the Master of Ceremonies this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for coming this afternoon. I thank all of you. This is an important moment in the history of our country, and I am gratified to see so many of you here. I thank all the speakers, including people like Mr. Tan Kim Lian, who will be speaking later. Our great hero, Mr. Leong Zhihian, who will be the last speaker. And I see in the distance there, Professor Paul Tambaya is here as well. Thank you, Paul. Jolovan Wham, thank you. Now, this rally, the theme of it is the abuse of process. We'll do it later. And you know, I am the lawyer for Zhihian in the defamation case, which Lee Hsien Loong launched against him. And of course, in that case, our defense is that you are actually abusing the process of the court in bringing the action against Zhihian. I will speak a bit about this case, but I do not want this rally to be just about this case, as I'm sure Zhihian will not want it to be. Because an abuse of process is a generic phrase that covers a lot of things. And we have heard from people like Simon, people like Brad, Nasser, Danny before that, about the various abuses of process ordinary Singaporeans face in everyday life. But let me start off my talk, my address to you this afternoon by telling you a story. In 1955, there was a black woman in Alabama in America. She was seated in a segregated section of the bus. And in those days, the segregation laws in America were very severe. It meant that if you were a black or colored person, you sat in a different section of the bus. And she was seated there. And that segregated section of the bus became filled up. And a white passenger wanted to sit in her place. And so the bus driver told her to get up and give her seat to the white passenger. She refused, and she was subsequently arrested and charged with breaking the law. And her case became one of the most celebrated cases to go up the United States Supreme Court. That lady, as many of you would know, was Rosa Parks. And the following year, the United States Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for states to have segregated buses. Ladies and gentlemen, Leong Zhihian is our Rosa Parks, albeit of a different gender. Because what he is doing today in Singapore is what no one has ever done before. And it is to stand up to a powerful figure and tell that person, enough is enough. I am not going to be railroad. I am standing my ground. I am going to defend myself. Lee Hsien Loong may fire volley after volley against Zhihian, but I can assure Lee Hsien Loong he will be receiving 2 volleys back for every volley he fires. Until that fateful day when all of us will meet in court and the truth will emerge. So I'm not blowing my own trumpet or I'm not hyping things up when I say this is going to be one of the seminal cases in our nation's history. And there are very few cases that are seminal. By a seminal case, I mean a case that will define the character of a nation. And in America, we know the Rosa Parks case. We know the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, where 13 parents took the Board of Education in Kansas to the Supreme Court because they practiced desegregation in schools there. And the United States Supreme Court in 1954 ruled that it was unconstitutional to have segregated schools. So it takes courage. You have to make a stand, finally. And isn't it so true what Winston Churchill once told us? Courage is the first of all human qualities, because it is the quality that characterizes all other qualities. And it takes courage to stand up and speak. And Zihian's case is all about the freedom of expression. I understand full well the defamation laws. Yes, we must operate within the boundaries of the defamation laws. But how is it possible that when thousands of people shared that post, Zihian is the only one finding himself being sued? Why is it that the Prime Minister has not sued the writer of the coverage or anyone else, the authors of what are the alleged defamatory words? And you know, many people have this misconception that, oh, he's got to sue them overseas. That's not true. He can, if he wants to, sue them in Singapore. I don't want to get other people in trouble, all right, by suggesting that he sues so many other people. But these are pertinent questions which all of us will have when we consider this case. And that is all I'm going to say about this case, because I want to move on to other abuses of process, which I think are as important for Singaporeans. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, every day we are faced with this word. And what is this word? This word is meritocracy. What the PAP says is the guiding principle of their political ideology, meritocracy. All right? They say that in Singapore, everything is equal, and you rise up by your own merits. Really? Is it meritocracy when someone does not perform and is not removed from his position, as has happened so many times? You know how meritocracy came about? Meritocracy was a phrase, was a word coined in 1958 by a British Labour Member of Parliament named Michael Young. And he was actually writing from the perspective of an academic in 2034, a date that is not even upon us yet. Yeah? And in it, he was describing a new social system, that a new political, social, economic system that did away with the British caste system. You know, the British, till today, have terrible class problems, yeah? They have the aristocrats and all that, and so the Labourites, the Labour MPs, they are from the working class, or they represent the working class. In fact, the British Labour Party arose out of the working class in Scotland. That is how it came about. And so he wrote, he imagined there was this system that people would actually rise up through their own merits. But he warned that eventually there would arise a class that confined itself to them, to their own, and would not allow others in. So, he was warning about the dangers of such a system. He wrote it as a satire, and he was describing the dangers of such a system. And isn't it ironic, my friends, that in Singapore, the PAP have taken a satire and adopted it as the national ideology. And look where we are today. I tell you something. Meritocracy, for it to work, requires two things. It is the law of differences and it is the law of mobility. Law of differences, what do you mean by that? It means all of us are different in abilities, all right? None of us are equal. But it also means that you put the best person in position to do a particular job. Are we practicing that? Every global talent, every global search for talent seems to end up in the SAF. So we had an SAF general run NOL. And we all know what happened. I tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a laughing matter, but I appreciate the laughter. I was a top shipping lawyer for many, many years. And you know, in the early 2000s, you know, NOL was eventually bought over by this French group called CGM CMA, all right? I can tell you, one of those entities, I can't remember whether it was CGM or CMA now, was virtually a bankrupt entity that had to be rescued by the French government by pumping in money. Okay? All right? And you know, ladies and gentlemen, we were founded as a national entity by Raffles because Singapore possessed a great port. And in about 3 weeks' time, we are going to celebrate our bicentennial. On the 19th of February, we are going to celebrate 200 years since Raffles landed and founded Singapore. And I tell you this, I am grateful that Raffles founded us. I know there are some who will say, oh no, we shouldn't celebrate that because it's colonialism and all that. I say, I totally disagree with you. I totally disagree with you. And you know why? If Raffles had not stepped foot on our shores, we would not be where we are today, okay? And people do not realize that Singapore was not an automatic choice for him. He had the choice of either going to Aceh in North Sumatra, and you know what a great harbor Aceh has in Sabang. Or he could have gone to Karimun, which is only a short distance away. He chose Singapore, and Singapore developed from there. And I can tell you, we may have anti-colonial sentiments, that's fine. But let's not forget that the British gave us a great civil service, a great system of justice, first class. I lived for some years in Indonesia, and I can tell you the difference between the British and the Dutch colonialists. The Dutch never did anything for Indonesia. For 350 years that they were in control of Indonesia, not a single Dutch person back in Holland paid taxes because they pillaged Indonesia. The country was so rich, they could take away the riches from Indonesia and feed their own country. And they never developed the civil administration. They never developed the justice system. They were the ones who introduced corruption into Indonesia to control the local population. So I am thankful that the British stepped into Singapore and built up a country to where it is today. But let me come back to this thing called meritocracy. You know, a few months ago, Ong Ye Kung says, we've got to double down on meritocracy. But look what it has produced. We are the world's second most unequal society, according to the United Nations. And this was pointed out by none other than Professor Tommy Koh just last month. I say, if you want to have real meritocracy, you make sure that there's equality in outcome. You make sure that when someone does not perform his job, he is sacked. And wasn't that what Lee Kuan Yew told his own party and told the nation many years ago? That if something does not work, the top person is removed. But today, you have a data breach, and 1.5 million people are affected. And has anything happened to the top management? All right? You have, in the last 16 months, 9 deaths amongst our national servicemen. Most tragically, only 2 days ago, with Aloysius Pang. And do you see generals being removed? No. You see an endless stream of committee of inquiries, all right? But things never seem to improve. So let us not talk about meritocracy under these circumstances, because it is not real meritocracy. It is not real meritocracy. And it is what Michael Young warned us of. You are going to have this group of people who claim that they have risen to the top of their careers because of their own merit. But you know in Singapore what that means? It means they have risen to the top because of their grades. And they wear their grades as a badge of honor. And then, when they get into that group, they protect that group. All right? And you know what? After a while, they become a different class. They call themselves natural aristocrats. And the rest of us are the mediocres. So, ladies and gentlemen, that to me is the most egregious abuse of process in our society today. When we try to suggest that everything is hunky-dory, is squeaky clean, everyone is in position because of their merit. You can't conduct a global hunt for talent, have an SAF general run the MRT. After 5 failed years, have another SAF general replace him. There are many better MRT systems in the world. Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan. Why are we not hiring those people? The next one I want to come to is the CPF, which many of my fellow speakers have already touched on. I first contested in an election in 2015 when I was the Secretary General of the National Solidarity Party. At every rally, I spoke out against the CPF because to me, that is another great abuse of process. I tell you why. You get Singaporeans, when they start working, to start contributing to this, promising them that this is their nest egg that will take care of them in their retirement years. Do you know that any pension scheme, including the CPF, is already delayed payment to that person? Because in your CPF, I can't remember now the figures, but in those days, you were probably contributing 20% of your salary, right, to CPF. So you are deprived of that use of 20%. On the promise that when you reach retirement, you will enjoy the fruits of that 20% and the accumulation of that 20%. 20 over percent. I think at one time the figure combined with the employer's portion was 37%. Yeah. 40%, yes. Thank you. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, I have lost count of the number of tweaks they have done to CPF, all right? I tell you this, and I don't mince my words. What they are doing to CPF now is virtually a confiscation of your money. It is money. Unless you change the government, you will never see in your lifetime. I was shocked a couple of weeks ago. I read on social media, someone claimed that he had tens of thousands in his CPF. And you know what he was getting every month? $2.88. $2.88. But even if you are better off, even if you get $400 to $500, tell me, can you survive on that in modern day Singapore? The most expensive city in the world for the last 5 years. And you know what? I don't care what those so-called sophisticated financial advisors tell you or tell us. Some are still trying to defend and justify the CPF. To me, the CPF is a broken system. And if ever I come into government one day, I am going to totally scrap it and revamp the CPF. It is broken. How can you have a system where people in retirement years cannot afford to retire? 70, 80-year-olds are still having to work. You tell me that is a good system? I tell you that is a bad system. Bad. And you know what upsets me the most? It is these broken promises. It is this constant shifting of the goalposts by the government because there are no checks in Parliament. And you even have one NMP who tells you that CPF is not your money. Can you believe that? And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I tell you something. I come back, unfortunately, and sadly, referencing those NS men who have died in training. I think every 18-year-old who takes up arms to defend his country has the right to expect that his government will protect his interests. A government that does not protect his interests, that allows his job to be taken away by a foreigner, I tell you, is a government not worthy of the name. And so I tell you, I do not know what has come of Singapore, which is why I wrote it in the banner. You go to any other country, you go to Australia, you go to America, you go to Britain, you go to Japan, Taiwan, any country, you see if their government will favor foreigners instead of their own citizens. And you know, when I make statements like that, people sometimes accuse me of being xenophobic. Or they say you're xenophobic. Oh, that's xenophobia. We are a country of immigrants. I say no, we are not a country of immigrants. We are a country of citizens. And it's around citizenship, citizenry, that we build a community. And if I see my fellow citizen unable to support himself, unable to get to the finishing line, it is my concern. Because all of us must work together as that community and pull each other together to reach that finishing line. And not like this PAP MP, PAP government that runs our country like a commercial transaction. All right? If you are a citizen but you are more expensive than a foreigner, okay, I'll give the job to a foreigner because at the end of the day, I make more profits. That is how they are running this country. You know, their thinking is, if I have $1 and I have to choose between two people who to give that dollar to, I give that dollar to what I consider is the more productive person because he will produce more and the rest of society will benefit. What I call trickle down, right? Neoliberalism, trickle down economics. That has not worked, my fellow Singaporeans. Today, after 40 years of neoliberal PAP policies, what do we find? We find Singaporeans who don't have retirement adequacy. We find Singaporeans who don't even own a home. We find Singaporeans, unless you own landed property, maybe even unable to pass on your asset to your next generation. And so our society becomes more and more unequal. And meritocracy is not going to help, I'm telling you. Taman's so-called escalator of mobility is the most flawed argument I have ever heard. Because studies show that mobility decreases with inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have given you something to think about. What I believe we need is this. In 3.5 weeks' time, we are going to celebrate our bicentennial. But I think this is a moment where we need to rediscover ourselves. We need to rediscover the purpose in Singapore. Like what Brett said, we need that creativity and innovation which is lacking in our society today. And that is because we have allowed fear to cloud our mind. It has become a plague that has infected every one of us. We must get rid of that fear. And I tell you, that is why Leong Zihian standing his ground and not surrendering is so important to removing this fear. So I hope in closing, that our bicentennial will be an occasion when we will rediscover and we will restore our nation to the exceptionalism that all of us have come to expect. Thank you very much.